Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
I'm stuck. He's looking good. Look his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It is another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1. Thanks for being with us on the program. Alex Kirry, Dan Jimenez is always with me. Lots to talk about. If you were to tell me, Dan, that we were going to have our 7th race winner in 13 races, I would have said, yeah, right. Where are those 7 coming from? Even at this point, right now, as I'm thinking about it, I'm going, who are all the 7? Like, it's crazy to think. Both Ferrari drivers, both Mercedes drivers. I don't know. Did George win one? Yeah.
Both Ferrari, both Mercedes,
both McLarens, and just one lonely Red Bull racing driver with the win this year. So, off of the Oscar Piastri wild win on Sunday at the Hungarian Grand Prix, no broken trophies for McLaren. If you notice that. Lando is Lando and Oscar were both very sure to make sure that trophy was off of the pedestal or that it was moved back while the champagne was broken. So Oscar Piastri with the win, the weirdness that went along with it, those 3 or 4 laps of them begging Lando to switch back places with Oscar. Explain to people like myself who kind of saw what was going on, but sort of still didn't really understand why it was so necessary to switch them back or why they were switched back in the first place. I know a lot of it had to do with covering up other drivers and the undercuts and the overcuts and blah, blah, blah. Why did we find ourselves in the place where Lando had to give the place back to Oscar? The awkwardness of please, will you please do the right thing as a team? We've talked about this. Why did we get to that spot where Lando ended up having to give that place back to his teammate and Oscar Piastri got his first win in F1?
So whatever explanation I give, I do not want it to be interpreted as an endorsement of McLaren's strategy decisions. I by no way want to be associated with that, but I will explain what happened. So they started 1-2, right? And which means that they're likely going to be in a scenario where they're too close to each other on the track to pit them on the same lap.
Sure.
So you got to pick one. And normally when you pit first, you undercut the person in front of you, or the person you're racing against. And what that means is when you get put on those fresh tires, you're going to lap faster on the fresh tires than the person who's still out there is lapping on their old tires. So if you're overlapped by 2 laps and you're half a second faster on new tires than old tires, then you're going to gain a second on the person in front of you. So that's called the undercut. And that kind of flows throughout the whole entire field. So everyone's kind of looking backwards, working from the back of the field to the front, thinking, okay, I want to extend my stint as far as I can so I can keep fresh tires or fewer laps on the next stint, but I can't stay out so long that the person behind me undercuts me. So this is like domino effect that moves forward into the field. And so since they started first and second, it's likely that if at least one, if not on both pit stops, they're just going to be too close to each other. So you got to pick one. And it sounded like that they had a pre-race discussion and agreement that, hey, if this happens on the last pit stop and we have to pit one of you before the other, and that causes a change in the running order, we're going to switch back after the pit stops. And all the drivers are like, cool, we'll do it, right? That's only fair, right? So Lando pits, they pit Lando. We're coming up the last pit stop. Oscar's led the entire race. It's time to pit them. They decide to pit Lando. They, being McLaren race strategy, decides to pit Lando first because they want to, quote unquote, cover off Hamilton. And that means that, hey, Hamilton, if he pits early, we don't want to get undercut by Hamilton. So we have to let Lando go first, cover off Hamilton, and then Oscar second, and then we'll switch you back around. Well, they do it, and Oscar pits. And so when he comes back out, Lando's in front. And I think this is where what they didn't anticipate was Lando just went, full beans, as they say. In that final stint, it was not conserving his tires, and he builds like a 5 to 6 second lead over Oscar, and Oscar's not, quote unquote, keeping up. And so that's when you started to hear the radio message coming through of like, hey, we think you're using your tires too much in turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. Like, they started naming every single turn. It's like, why don't you just say like, dude, you have to slow down? So they say you're using your tires too much. And which is their way to say like, hey, you're making this gap awkwardly large against Oscar. And Lando just doesn't care. He's just going as fast as he can because he wants to win the race.
Right. The whole thing was, if he's okay, get him closer to me, and then we'll switch. And it was like,
get him closer. And so Oscar's having a hard time catching up. And so they start like doing this like emotional gaslighting or something of Lando.
We've talked about this. We've discussed it as a team. Remember what the discussion was. It was like it was so weird.
It's like your mom telling you like, remember who you are, just like guilting you into making the decision they want you to make.
Okay, but imagine too. Imagine Max's engineer getting on and going, we talked about this in the pre-race meeting. He would have said F you and freaking gone on to win. That's the part that I know that you probably have a little bit of a hard time with too, because I think there's a handful of drivers, and like, let me ask you this. Is Senna giving that spot up? Is Vettel giving that spot up? Is Michael Schumacher giving that spot up? Is Lewis Hamilton giving that spot back? Absolutely not.
Nobody.
So that's the part where I'm like, hey, McLaren, are you guys all right? Are you like, they didn't anticipate being this successful, I feel like, this at this point in the year, because they still don't know. It's like winning the lottery when you're that you're living in that mobile home and you're like, I don't know what we do with all this money. I don't know. It's like, you don't know what you're doing right now with all this. They don't. It just is the weirdest way to do it. And why didn't Andre Seidel get on the freaking? Isn't he the guy? Isn't he the team principal? Why didn't he get on and go, hey,
tell him what to do? Move
over, dude. Like, whatever happened to the Ross Brauns of the world and people getting on and being like, and even Toto getting on and saying, well, we have to do this, like something like that. I mean,
someone's got to get on. Yeah, yes. The race engineer was just being too pleady. And
it was
so awkward.
Swap spots. It's like, at your convenience. This is freaking F1, dude. Come on, man. That's the part I hate.
So Lando, 2 laps from the end, he stops on the pit straight. Like, literally, it looked like he was stopped. Like, the close rate that he gave,
it was insane.
Oscar to catch up on the same straight. I mean, the straight is probably barely 5 seconds, so you have to think about it. He has to essentially come to a stop for him to catch up before they get to turn 1. And, so he passes, but it ruined the win for Oscar. Oscar's not an emotional guy or very extroverted like that anyways, but he was so subdued and apologized on his first race win radio call. Sorry, I had to make that.
I know it was awkward. Yeah. It's stupid.
It was. So Lando's not to blame. Oscar's not to blame. McLaren strategist on the pit wall and Andrea, Stella and everyone are to blame. That I think that you just can't, they were playing defense so much on Hamilton that they just put themselves in this awkward situation that you can't pit the driver and you can't undercut your own team and then expect a driver to switch it back around. I just think that it has to be completely off the table. You just pit the person in first, and then if the person in second gets undercut, race your way back around Lewis. Hindsight being 2020, you think you could have said, all right, Lando, right after Oscar pits, make the switch right now, and then you guys can go at it. Because once he made the switch with 2 laps to go, it was too late, or maybe he had yours up too much. It was too late for him to try to get back on. But you guys can race, but you got to make the switch and then go for it. And hopefully that would have, probably would have meant Lando would have gotten back around him and won anyways. But it's just a bummer. And I feel bad for both the drivers, and I can't really guilt them for what how they felt and what they said in the post race, because they got put in a terrible situation.
What's wild is that is that just as awkward of a back and forth radio message was between Max Verstappen and his engineer GP, who everybody kind of knows now because he's that guy who everybody knows, you've heard him on the radio so many times. When you have a really successful driver, it's like, Bono for Lewis, right? GP for Max when they get on there, and he's like, now again, he's like, we're not going to get into this pissing match on the radio. By the way, like, don't do this thing where we're fighting on the radio over these. You're talking to other teams over your radio message. Like, stop doing it. Grow up. Let's not be childish about this. And so that's kind of how you feel like you need to handle it. But Max was very clear. The strategy was, screwed up by his team. Does he get a race win if his team figures out the strategy? Or I think that the car just isn't even close to being fast enough right now.
No, he was fighting for third. Yeah, they are so far off. And the emotion is starting to boil up, and you can really see it and hear it and feel it, in all the radio communications from Max, that he's not happy and he does not like losing. And he kind of isn't showing his best self right now, when this pressure is on. I think that his popularity rating went, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, just took such a huge hit this last weekend with just kind of GP called it childish. I really think a lot of it was childish, and it didn't help that Crofty kept calling Max out for having stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning driving on the sim.
I'm always like, that's the dumbest thing. Who cares? Like, he's won all these other races without, by staying up till 3 in the morning. He kept bringing that up, and I was like, okay, get over it. This is a guy who does whatever he wants because he's one of the best racers. And you know what? It's not on him. The car's just not, right there. It's not like nobody's going to outrace Max if it's like car versus car right now. I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
Yeah, but the car is so far off. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Now, Hungary is a high downforce track. I was just reading that they were running their Monaco front wings. Like, all the teams are basically in their Monaco aero spec, which Max wasn't good at Monaco, and historically they haven't been great at high downforce tracks like that. Now we're going to a place in Spa where they should excel. And so I'm not declaring the reign of terror from Red Bull over until we see Spa. But if they have the same result and he can't get a podium in Spa, then they're host. What
does that mean though? Because he's up by 80 points though in the championship. So if he's getting fourth place the rest of the year, and even if Lando is to start winning out all these other ones, I mean, which is also
maybe
hard
not on
to
the
imagine.
Drivers, but on the constructors.
Well,
I think
yes,
that's where I think that it's really the risk that they have. But they are struggling hard right now. We'll see if Max can kind of bring a cooler head to Spa. But I mean, even the move he pulled on Lewis, and when he dive bombed Lewis, caused that wreck, and then in post race blamed Lewis for turning in on him. He's just not he was not speaking rationally. There's in no scenario, and I can't believe he didn't get a penalty, but just in no world is Lewis at fault for any of that. And he's just kind of driving outside of his mind right now in a bad way. And Spa is going to be super telling, because that should be his bread and butter. We talked about it last time. Spa, you can drive in your sleep. And, another thing to put it into perspective, I was just looking at the Formula Data Analysis Twitter, and every team improved their pace year over year, Hungary last year to Hungary this year, except Red Bull.
Wow.
Red Bull was 0.2 slower than their race pace last year. And everyone else was Ferrari was 0.7 of a lap quicker. McLaren was 0.6 of a lap quicker, and Red Bull was 0.2 of a lap slower than last year. So it's not that they, haven't made upgrades as well as everybody else. It's that they've actually taken a step back to how quick their car was last year, which is wild.
Where were our dream podiums versus our reality podiums in our last episode? Because I feel like your dream podium actually got closer this weekend than what the reality was. But I mean, I don't know. At this point,
I went back and listened. Yeah, I'm keeping receipts. I went back and listened. My dream podium was Oscar, Lando, Nico Hulkenberg.
Wow. You got.
So
you know what?
First two.
What was wild is that Haas took a weird step back this week. I thought for sure they were going to be, because I think that, because what did Nico do? Hulk was, I think he was he at least got to Q3, didn't he?
Pull it up. I want to say he did. Yeah, I'll pull it up. So Nico Hulkenberg finished
They're like
13th.
13th, and K-Mag was like 16th or something like that. Yeah.
And he started 11th. Nico started 11th and fell back to 13th. So yeah, no, they weren't very good.
They were just right
in
there.
the Haas Ferrari, they're more of like a low downforce track. So hopefully next week they'll return to form. This probably wasn't the best setup for their car, but yeah, I had picked Nico for that third spot, so I was kind of far off, but I got the first two.
I'm wondering if okay, so you got the first two. My all Spanish speaking podium didn't happen, obviously. I don't remember what my real podium was that I had guessed on. I can't remember what I had actually said on the real podium. Hold on, I've got it in my notes here because I was like, I don't know. In my head, I give myself more credit than
I remember. So the second I saw Sergio Bennett in Q1 in qualifying, I remember that you had picked him to win.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That was bad form by me. I don't know what Sergio, like now at this point, we're all talking about when he put it into the wall in Q1. I was like, well, that's the end of this guy's freaking stint. I mean, like he's not going to be racing anywhere in an F1 team at all if this is the situation he's going to keep doing. I don't know. I've never seen somebody fall off so quickly, especially after they signed a big contract and everybody's looking at him going, all right, well, the magnifying glass is on you. He's like, oh, okay, no problem. I'll just race the worst I have in years.
Yeah. I was just looking. He had 4 podiums in like the first 5 races of the season. This is
what he did last year,
too. We've completely forgotten about it.
Yeah, he's terrible.
He's just Mr. out in Q1, not scoring points. I mean, he did probably have his his best race in a while because he went from his terrible starting position.
Yeah, recovery drive.
Finished in the points. He was like only 2 or 3 spots behind Max, at the finish line. But in the interview, Helmut Marko said that they're going to have a big meeting after Spa. He's going to fly to England and they're going to have the sit-down conversation and make a decision. But you got to think that the hot swap is coming there for Sergio.
Which is they're going to put Yuki in?
As good as my guess is it's Daniel Ricciardo.
Oh, my gosh. Why?
Marketing. Is my guess.
Oh, jeez.
And then Liam Lawson comes in backfills on VCarb, and then they race next year like that. I think they only do Daniel for a year.
Jeez.
And they see if Liam is ready for the Red Bull seat in 2026 is my guess.
So
who knows? Anybody's guess.
I know one of the things that Lando, he wears his heart on his sleeve. And again, he's like, he's a pretty new. He's new to this being up at the top of the, of the grid kind of stuff. And so when they qualified 1-2, he had a bad start and he goes, well, yeah, I swapped back because you know what? The reality is I didn't lose the race right then. I lost it in the first 10 seconds when I had a bad start. McLaren today clarified that it was actually a glitch. Could you imagine? So they mentioned that he experienced a glitch finding second gear during his acceleration from pole, which allowed Verstappen to slipstream alongside. And they said that wasn't user error on his part. It was actually inside the computer of the. Isn't that weird? Like, if you're Lando, if you're Lando, that just makes you more pissed. That's the kind of stuff you keep under your hat, if you're a McLaren.
He should have won Spain, but he had a bad start. Started on pole, and they let George get around him, and because he was trying to cover off Max and. I guess, I think he went from first to third by the first turn, and that was just user error too. So there are so many, if but for one thing, Lando should have won that race instances this year, and hopefully they get all sorted out and he actually does start stringing together some wins and eating away at Max's lead for an interesting drivers championship. But at a minimum, the championship is on for sure at the constructors level.
So let me give you an idea as to where we are development-wise with these teams or just kind of progress in the season. To start the year, 7 out of the first 8 races, Ferrari was on the podium. And a couple of those, they were both up on the steps, right? Since then, the last 5 races, they have 1 P3 between the 2 racers. Oof. So that's where Ferrari's at right now. In the first 8 races of the season for Mercedes, they had 0 podiums, and it didn't look like they were going to get one at all. Then they had 2 P3s in a row, and then they've gone P1, and then another P3. So they've been on the podium all 5 of the last 5 races. Ferrari's only been on 1 out of the last 5, and it was a lonely P3. McLaren has been the most consistent scoring team, especially at the end, in the last few, because they've been on the podiums in all except for 3 races this season. So that's a crazy, when you talk about a flip of a team, when you talk about where McLaren was last year, like at the beginning of the year, remember they were 18th, 17th, 18th, 20th, they were
Alpine. Yeah.
They were bad. And then they made a massive turnaround. But then the next step was getting where they are now, which is crazy to think where they've been. They're winning races. They've obviously both drivers have won races, but I mean, like Lando he had the P1 in Miami, and then he went P2, P2, skipped a race, P3, and then P2 again, of course. I don't know. Like if you're him, stealing that race when you very well could have, that's a hard time to give it away because, when is the next time? Just based off of he hasn't been performing that. I mean, he's been getting a lot of P2s, but he's not winning these races, like everybody thinks he's going to at the clip he's supposed to be, quote unquote, And so McLaren is the most consistent, though, over the entirety of the season. And yeah, you're right. It was Verstappen, Perez 1-2 the first 2 races, 1-2, 1-2, and then they went 1-2 again in Japan, and then they went 1-3 in China, and then after that, Sergio Perez has been nowhere to be found after he signed that new deal. So it's weird.
Yeah, the first race of the season, Max won by like 30 seconds.
Yeah,
like we
were
just that's it.
Yep.
And now he's fighting for 3rd and 4th, trying to get onto the podium. Like the rest of the season is going to be so good. I'm looking forward to every single race into 2025. It's going to be great. We'll see how many total winners we can get before it might just be these 7. Maybe Sergio snags one. I don't think that. I'm trying to think who completes the rest of the list for Formula A. It's probably Aston. I don't think that they're close enough. But between these 3 teams, it's going to be or 4 teams really. It's going to be awesome.
Okay, so give me an idea here. We've got Spa coming up this weekend. We've talked a little bit about the setup of this racetrack. You said earlier in the show, you're like, yeah, these guys, I mean, you drive Spa in your sleep. And is that because it's just like, other than Monaco, Spa has to be the one that everybody talks. I mean, it's the most historic track in the rest of F1, right? I mean, this is the place that everybody, it's what I grew up not knowing that much about F1, but all the racing games I played, you always were racing it. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Exactly. It's, super long history, fun track to drive. They say it's like the perfect driver's track, the elevation changes, the high speed corners, all of that. But it doesn't actually make for, at least in recent history, hasn't made for super great racing. Usually in the last few years, it's just Max been dominating. So I think qualifying is super important in surviving that first corner. That is like a super tight hairpin. In years past, we've seen some big incidents in turn 1 and like Roman Grosjean running over 3 cars going into turn 1
right
there. But you survive the first corner and then, it's just one of these strategy races after that. But it's going to be low downforce because you've got 3 really long straights that you have to account for. And so, yeah, you should expect, maybe McLaren, it might struggle a little bit. They're better in the high downforce stuff like we just saw. So they might take a step backwards. But this will, I think, really the proof will be in the pudding this week, and we'll know, I think, how the rest of the year is going to shake out relative to Red Bull's advantage after this next race.
So when they take the break, remind me too, they don't even touch the car, right? Everything just kind of shuts down.
I think it's some sort of mandatory shutdown.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not going to see the thing that we're going to see that's going to change over that month, between now and I think August 25th is the Dutch Grand Prix when we come back from that break. Will we see Sergio Perez somewhere on the grid?
I am going to bet that he gets sacked.
Okay.
I think that this next race will be farewell to Sergio is my guess, but could be wrong.
Does he find himself on a team next year?
No, I think he's done, completely done.
Ew.
I just, if you're, I guess the remaining, if you're Williams, if you're, I guess technically Haas, Alpine, Sauber, are you looking at like all the possible available drivers shifting around in the market? Are you really like going to take Sergio relative to a younger talent? I just don't think so.
Hard to explain that bad performance after. I mean, there's a guy who's like a pretty recent race winner in F1. He's been on multiple podiums over the last few years, and yet we could see him not on the grid and not racing ever again in F1.
Yeah, I just don't think if you're an F1 team that you're wanting to take on a rehab case. You're like, well, we're going to rehab this driver. We're going to get him back into a good mental state. He's going to like nobody wants to take on that. But yeah, during the summer break, no development on the cars. The car that is going to come back at the Dutch Grand Prix is going to be the same one that we see this next week, and it's really just going to be driver move changes. I think that there's been I can't remember who said it, but there have been quotes that have said like everything will get sorted out on the drivers' silly season stuff during the summer break, and by the time we come back at the end of August, we'll know who's going to be where.
Well, I always love it because the wildness of the silly season is spilt over into every part of the year now. We talk about this a lot, in my regular job, where it's like our off season doesn't exist anymore. It used to be that the summer was all right. NBA season's over. You could take some time off there, but hockey's invaded our world. College football's become a 24/7 situation, and I feel like F1 silly season. It's not as fun without it being silly all the time, without there being drama all the time. All these sports, and Dan, this is honestly the way it is. The way I've learned it over the years is they all figure out, hey, it's a lot better if people talk about us all year long, even if it's negatively. Like, let's get everybody talking trash on these drivers. Let's start talking about the drivers market. Let's have a crazy thing pop up, where Lewis Hamilton in January, was like, oh, by the way, I've signed with Ferrari. Goodbye. Like, I mean, that was stuff that we never saw really that time of the year.
Is there a happier group of people on the planet right now than the producers of Drive to Survive after last weekend? They're like, well, how about we make a whole spin-off season of the Hungarian Grand Prix?
It's nice. They don't have to make up all the crap that they used to have to make up. So
honestly, just play the race over again, play the last 20 laps. All those quotes.
Yes, give me all the
they're
racer.
Just going to play over and over and over again, all those radio,
just from this race. Just Max's alone are awkward enough. Like, they will drag out those 3 or 4 laps, whatever it was. They'll make a full episode just out of those 3 or 4 laps of telling Lando, please, swap positions.
And then they're going to make it between Oscar and Lando when it really isn't between those two guys. But they're going to make it. They always want it to be between the drivers. But it's less exciting to be like, well, it's a maybe there'll be a new element. It's driver versus strategist.
You get the slow motion of him looking to the other side of the garage, and then like the slow motion of the other one looking to the other side of the garage, and then they'll pit those guys against each other, and then those guys, because they're young enough, will be like, well, shoot, maybe I am noticing, maybe I didn't notice it, maybe I'm being too nice. So who knows? It's wild, but I'm here for all of it. I want the drama. Come on, I'll take all of it, whatever form we can get it. So we've got Spa coming up this weekend. And then we are off for a month. I say we. They're off for a month, but we'll, of course, break down that Grand Prix next week, and then we'll get you into the silly season. If any news pops up during that time, we'll, of course, jump on and get on the podcast as well. So, Dan, thanks for hanging out with me again this week, as usual.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, we'll be back again. More to go after this week at Spa. We'll catch you then, everybody. For Dan, I'm Alex. See you next time, everybody.